Berlin, May 1940. Hermann Göring picked up the intelligence report, read it once, and laughed. Roosevelt had just stood before Congress and made a declaration that stunned the world. America would build 50,000 warplanes a year. Göring set the paper down and told his staff something he would spend the rest of his life regretting. The Americans are bluffing. They build refrigerators and automobiles, not warplanes. He was wrong. Not slightly wrong, catastrophically wrong. Because by 1944, America wasn't producing 50,000 planes a year. It was producing nearly 100,000. And that single miscalculation, that one moment of contempt, helped seal the fate of the entire Third Reich. This is the story of the most stunning industrial transformation in human history, and the man who laughed at it before it buried him. May 16, 1940. German panzer divisions were tearing through France. The Allied lines were collapsing. Dunkirk was days away. And in Washington, D.C., Franklin Roosevelt walked to the podium before a joint session of Congress and said something that made even his allies raise their eyebrows. I should like to see this nation geared up to the ability to turn out at least 50,000 planes a year. The room went quiet. In 1939, the United States had produced just 3,611 military aircraft. The Army Air Corps had roughly 1,700 combat planes, many of them already obsolete. Roosevelt was asking for a 14-fold increase. In Europe, the reaction ranged from skepticism to outright mockery. Germany's leadership filed the announcement away as propaganda, the desperate bluster of a nation that had no stomach for real war. What they didn't see was what was already happening in Detroit. His name was William Knudsen, a Danish immigrant, former president of General Motors, a man who understood, better than almost anyone alive, how to take a factory and make it move. When Roosevelt needed someone to lead the greatest industrial mobilization in American history, his advisor Bernard Baruch gave a simple answer. First, Bill Knudsen. Second, Bill Knudsen. Third, Bill Knudsen. Knudsen walked away from a salary of $300,000 a year. He went to work for the United States government for $1. And then he got to work. His insight was straightforward, but radical for the aircraft industry. You didn't need aircraft factories to build aircraft. You needed discipline, systems, and scale. The same principles that put a car in every American driveway could put a bomber over every German city. By December 1941, before America had even formally entered the war, monthly military aircraft production had already climbed to 2,000 planes, a 20-fold increase from just 2 years earlier. The arsenal was waking up. If you want to understand what America actually did between 1941 and 1945, you don't need to look at a battlefield. You need to look at a farm field outside Ypsilanti, Michigan. On April 18, 1941, construction began on what would become the largest factory under a single roof in the history of the world, the Ford Willow Run Bomber Plant. 3.5 million square feet. An assembly line stretching 1 mile. Ford's production chief, Charles Sorensen, made a promise that seemed insane at the time. Willow Run would produce 1 B-24 Liberator heavy bomber per hour. Other factories were managing 1 per day. The early results were ugly. The first bomber off the line required a complete rebuild. Quality failures hit 50%. By early 1943, the plant was producing just 56 bombers a month, nowhere near promises. Critics had a nickname for it, Will It Run? But Ford's engineers didn't quit. They broke the B-24's 488,193 individual parts into manageable subassemblies. They invented hydraulic riveting tools. They prefabricated wiring harnesses. They kept the line moving through 578 design changes in a single year. And then it clicked. September 1943, 148 bombers. December 1943, 365 bombers. April 1944, 428 B-24s in a single month. One bomber every 63 minutes, around the clock, 7 days a week. That one factory was outproducing the entire German aviation industry. Here's the thing about German military intelligence during this period. It wasn't entirely blind. General Friedrich von Bottike, the German military attaché in Washington, was sending accurate reports back to Berlin throughout 1940 and into 1941. His cables warned that American industrial mobilization would reach, in his words, unimaginable heights. Berlin dismissed him as a defeatist. When Bottike met with Hitler directly in early 1939 to brief him on American potential, the Führer wasn't interested in industrial assessments. He went on a rant about American racial character. The Luftwaffe's intelligence branch had its own blind spots. When reports arrived describing American factories switching to 3-shift operations around the clock, German analysts assumed exaggeration. When word came that women were entering aircraft plants in large numbers, the Luftwaffe's assessment was that this signaled desperation, a workforce scraping the bottom of the barrel. They couldn't conceive of another explanation. That ideological rigidity, the absolute refusal to take American capabilities seriously, meant that Germany was strategically unprepared for what hit them. The German analysts who dismissed female aircraft workers as evidence of American weakness made a mistake that would define the war. In 1941, women made up less than 1% of the American aircraft workforce. By 1943, they were 65% of it, more than 310,000 women building the planes that were destroying German cities. At the Douglas plant in Long Beach, California, women made up more than half the workforce. What happened to quality under this supposedly desperate workforce? At Douglas, defect rates dropped from 3.2% to 0.3%. Women working in precision roles, wiring, instruments, inspection, didn't just maintain standards, they raised them. Ford redesigned tools to fit smaller hands and discovered, almost accidentally, that the lighter pneumatic tools reduced worker fatigue across the board. Injury rates dropped, efficiency climbed. Rose Will Monroe, one of the women who inspired the Rosie the Riveter image, was driving 3,000 rivets per shift at Willow Run with a 99.5% accuracy rate. Desperation? That was American democratic mobilization. And it was something the Nazi worldview was structurally incapable of understanding. German fighter pilots began to understand the truth before their leadership would admit it. Major Johannes Steinhoff, commanding a Luftwaffe fighter group in North Africa in late 1942, recorded the shift in his diary. The American pilots, he noted, were no longer amateurs. But more troubling than their improving skill was something simpler. There were more of them every day. By early 1944, the scale had become impossible to ignore. Ace pilot Heinrich Beer, with over 200 aerial victories, described flying a mission over Brunswick in January 1944. The bomber stream stretched from horizon to horizon, hundreds of flying fortresses and liberators filling the sky. His entire group had a handful of fighters, against hundreds. General Adolf Galland delivered the cold mathematics to Göring directly. Germany was losing approximately 1,200 fighters every month. It was producing around 1,000. America was producing 2,500 fighters monthly and losing only 400. Every month, the gap grew wider. Every month, the Luftwaffe got smaller and American air power got larger. There was no tactical solution to an equation like that. In 1944 alone, American factories produced 96,270 military aircraft. That single year's output exceeded Germany's entire wartime production of approximately 94,000 planes. Let that sit for a moment. 1 year. More planes than Germany built across the entire war. And it wasn't just volume. American bombers carried 13 50-caliber machine guns with thousands of rounds. German fighters were increasingly flying combat missions with partial ammunition loads. American aircraft had powered turrets, advanced bomb sights, and sophisticated navigation equipment. German fighters often lacked functioning radios. Boeing's Seattle plant was producing 16 B-17s every single day by May 1944. North American aviation was turning out 500 P-51 Mustangs every month. Lockheed was completing one P-38 Lightning every 90 minutes. The supporting industries matched every step of this pace. General Motors built nearly 58,000 aircraft engines under license. Packard produced over 55,000 Rolls-Royce Merlin engines. American aluminum output climbed 600%. When Germany responded by dispersing production into underground facilities using slave labor, the results were catastrophic. Not for the Allies, but for Germany itself. Sabotage was endemic. Quality collapsed. Productivity per German worker declined after 1943. American productivity increased 300% over the same period. Hermann Göring was captured on May 8, 1945, the last day of the war in Europe. At first, he was defiant. German technology had been superior, he insisted. They'd simply been overwhelmed by numbers. But as the interrogations continued, first at Augsburg, then at Camp Ashcan in Luxembourg, something shifted. Major Kenneth Heckler conducted extensive interviews with Göring in the summer of 1945. What emerged was a man slowly being forced to confront mathematics he had spent years refusing to look at. "I knew American industrial potential was great," Göring admitted, "but the execution exceeded my worst fears. That single factory at Willow Run produced more aircraft than our entire bomber force at peak. It was incomprehensible." He couldn't stop running the numbers. Prison psychologist G.M. Gilbert noted that Göring repeatedly calculated ratios in his cell, comparing individual American plants to entire German production totals. He kept coming back to Willow Run. At Nuremberg, prosecutors showed him the production charts. Films of the assembly lines played in the courtroom. The numbers were laid out with total clarity. America, 295,959 military aircraft. Germany, 94,677. America alone had produced more than the rest of the world combined, Axis and Allied, by 1944. "I never imagined they could increase aircraft production 100-fold in 4 years, Göring testified. Such growth seemed physically impossible. On the night of October 15, 1946, hours before his scheduled execution, Hermann Göring wrote what amounted to his final verdict on the war he had helped start. The Americans won through industrial power, not military prowess. We were not defeated by better soldiers, but by better factories. His last recorded words to the prison psychologist were equally stark. "We declared war on an industrial giant while it slept. When it awoke, we were doomed." He died that night, by his own hand evading the hangman's noose. But the legacy he left behind was written not in what he had built, but in what he had failed to understand. A man who laughed at a democratic nation's capacity to mobilize. A man who confused peace with weakness and prosperity with softness. Roosevelt had asked for 50,000 planes a year. America built 100,000. The B-24 Liberators rolling off Willow Run's assembly line every 63 minutes weren't just aircraft. They were the answer to 6 years of contempt, riveted together by housewives, teenagers, and immigrants, all of them proving something that Göring never grasped until it was far too late. Free people, united in common purpose, can outproduce any empire ever built on fear. Every single time.